Ohio people with Mennonite views, and they're gonna give us some missional news. Ohio Conference Cast.
You are listening to Ohio Conference Cast, a podcast dedicated to sharing missional stories and other information about Ohio Mennonite Conference. Here are your hosts, Thomas Dunn and Bill Seymour.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ohio Conference Cast. This is Thomas.
And this is Bill, and we have two guests with us today that we're very happy to have. Who are you, guests?
Well, hi, I'm Paula Snyder Belousek, pastor of Salem Mennonite in Elida, and the assistant moderator of the conference.
Wait, this is, I think, the first time she didn't say the Salem.
I noticed that, too. Yeah,
that's
I'm
pretty
trying
good.
to be humble. I'm trying to be humble.
Yeah.
I see that,
Is
yeah.
the pandemic knocking some edges off and making you more thoughtful of the other Salems in the conference?
Probably not, but...
Nice. All right, who's our other
This
guest?
is the only Dick Barrett, the conference minister for Ohio Conference, and it's good to be here today as we kind of switch roles of who's going to be doing the interviewing and who's going to be answering the questions.
All right, and with that, Thomas and I are no longer in the driver's seats.
Okay.
This podcast is brought to you by Paula and Dick.
Well, thanks, Thomas and Bill, for allowing Dick and I to chat with you today. This is a momentous occasion. About 3 years ago, you guys started this podcast. Is that right? About 3 years ago?
I think that's about close.
Yeah, I think it was, a little less than 3 years, but yeah, it sounds right.
Yeah. And so it was sort of your brainchild to get out and to gather missional stories from across the conference. You guys have done that diligently and well. And now you're ready to pass the mantle on to someone else.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. We've had a run and we've lost the energy to do it, and we're passing it along.
As Bill and I have talked, I've enjoyed the podcast. It's been really enjoyable for us. We've got to talk to some awesome people, both inside the conference and outside the conference. All of our loyal listeners, and I don't know what the running tally is at this point, but all of them, the plural, at least plural, may have noticed that there's been not as many podcasts coming out the last, 4 or 5 months. We've just been kind of not having the time to dedicate to the podcast to keep it going. And so about 2 or 3 months ago, we kind of said, hey, we either need to make a decision to reinvest into this and keep cranking out podcasts, or acknowledge, we just don't have the time to do it anymore. And so obviously we landed on the latter.
I don't know, Dick, do we need to take a moment of silence?
To kind of...
Yeah.
Normal edited out.
Sometimes it's good to have that silence. Sometimes I was kind of thinking, so whose idea actually was it to start it way back 2 to 3 years ago?
If I remember the story correctly, Thomas came to me and he said, we get along pretty well. We banter nicely, and I've been listening to this podcast. I don't remember which one it was, and the guys are really relaxed, and they just don't really prepare much. They just kind of get together and chat. Let's do that for Ohio Conference. And I said, sure.
And I think that stemmed from, I was on leadership team at the time, and I'm sure you guys have the same discussions. It's always, how do we communicate what's going on? How does communication happen? And so there's always seems to be that perennial question of, how do we communicate to our people? And so when that discussion was happening at leadership team 3 years ago, is when I was listening to podcasts all the time, and I just thought it'd be great if there was a podcast, because I like to listen to podcasts, and if there was an Ohio Conference podcast, I would listen to it. And so that's kind of where it came from.
And so after 3 years of doing it together, do you still get along fairly well?
Well, more or less.
We haven't seen each other for about 3 months, so I think we're on good
That's
terms
right.
now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for all those that are listening in, and if it feels like Thomas and Bill are a little bit muffled, or it sounds like they are, that's because they have their masks on, because they are in the same room, and they are abiding by the protocol of wearing masks. So we appreciate that.
We wanted to take some time to sort of have one last hurrah with Thomas and Bill, and really on behalf of the conference to thank you for your excellent service, for the creativity and time that you have put into the podcast. And I know you make light about how many listeners you have, but I know the people that I've talked to who listen to the podcast have really appreciated it, and that we want to see this podcast continue on in some way. We also wanted to just take some time to kind of recall your time as facilitators of this podcast. And so as you have been able to talk to various people around conference and travel around, have there been particular highlights or stories that have stood out during your time doing the podcast, things that you can continue to carry with you?
Well, I got to interview Ted Schwartz at convention a few years ago, and that was pretty cool.
And for people who don't know who Ted Schwartz is, can you tell us?
Ted is the actor and lead whatever at Ted and Company, the Menno actor people.
Yeah, talking to kind of the Menno famous people have been cool. They're great people, great conversations that we would just never seek out otherwise. I mean, I would never have the gumption or whatever to like call up Megan Good and say, "Hey, can I have a conversation with you because your books are awesome?" But since it's a podcast, I can say, "Hey, Ohio Conference wants to hear from you. Will you talk to us?" And so, yeah, we got to talk to Ted Schwartz, Megan Good,
the Hirsches,
yeah,
Glenn Guyton,
yeah, Glenn
Guyton, a lot of
Guyton,
people at Mennonite Mission Network,
Dick Barrett,
Dick Barrett, a couple of times,
Ralph Reinford,
yeah, Ralph,
yeah.
Yeah,
some
so the
other guy from the Northwest.
Mennonite celebrities.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's been great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think honestly, the thing that I remember probably the most are a couple of communications that we received back. One from Lucas Johnson, whom we originally knew as the guy who walked his dog, and he's over in Pennsylvania, and he reached out to us pretty early on and thanked us for helping him to connect with conference. And I do think that the podcast helped encourage Lucas to connect with conference. And now he's working on or is credentialed or in some way, and he's been a delegate at meetings, and I think that's all fairly fresh in the last couple of years. And so I'm really grateful that happened.
And
plus, he's a cool guy.
He recorded our intro music, which I think
that's right.
Paula could. I mean, you've sung that before, right? Do you have that ready?
Ohio Conference Cast.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
That might be better than Lucas's.
Yeah. I don't know if Lucas has copyrighted that or not. You might have to send him some money, Paula.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah, so grateful for Lucas. He's sort of like the number one fanboy of this podcast. So, but
self-proclaimed number one fanboy.
Yeah. But yeah, certainly that's one of the gifts of the podcast is it's helped to keep people connected across the geography of the conference.
I've also come to appreciate now, as after serving as conference minister for a little over a year, as I travel around and hear from different people, that how many people from outside of conference have listened to it, and their thoughts about conference are, a lot of it is based on what you have talked about during your podcast. So I think we appreciate that as well, that it's gone beyond Ohio Conference.
We've gotten a lot of encouragement from folks at Mennonite Mission Network and Peace and Justice Support Network and other folks, and even some invitations to collaborate.
And I was wondering, have there been any memorable bloopers that you could even share? Maybe just.
I remember like the time I laughed the hardest during Ohio Conference Cast was when Jessica Schrock-Ringenberg was telling a story. I can't remember.
Hogs.
It had something to do with pig anatomy. And
castration. It had to do with pig castration. Her husband was trying to castrate a pig and didn't complete the job.
That's right.
And it was very graphic and hilarious.
I don't know. Did that get edited out or did that get
We did
published?
edit it out. We thought it was a little too graphic, I guess.
Yeah, so imagine what Bill has summarized and imagine a lot more detail in Jessica telling it with all of her
verve.
Yeah. So sorry, audience. I don't know. Maybe someday we can publish that.
Yeah. Well, maybe Norm can at least run the laughter reel.
Yeah.
No, so we have Jessica Schrock-Ringenberg, the rock star up at Zion Mennonite Church in Archbold. Are you really a rock star?
I'm blushing right now.
You're blushing? Wow.
I am.
So wait, you're a farmer, right?
I am a farmer. And I learned how to castrate
That might be more
pigs,
detailed
so.
than our audience wants, but thanks, Farmer Jess.
Another
Here's
edit.
the third edit thus far.
Another edit. No, but my husband, somebody showed him how to castrate the pigs, and he's like, hey, I think I can do it. He's like, but then he started, and he's like, I just can't do this, Jess. So I had to do it.
He started?
He started.
How far did he get?
He's like, this is a lot harder than it looks.
I think we need to start this over. Welcome, everybody, to Ohio Conference Cast.
I know. I was like, he started it, and he's like, man, this is a lot harder than it looks. So, yeah.
Ohio Conference Cast.
And I think, wasn't there a time that you forgot to record too? Is that a famous blooper that we even want to share?
Well, yeah, Thomas and I drove half an hour over to Canton, Ohio, to Immigrant Worker Project headquarters, and we did a 45-minute interview with the lawyer there, and I had forgotten to press record, and we were out of time and had to leave, and so he never made it to a podcast.
Oh, man.
It was terrible.
Yeah, that's tough. That was a good podcast. So whoever our predecessors are, or
Post-cessors?
Whoever follows us, that'd be a good interview to follow up on.
Remember to hit record.
Yeah.
So the two of you have done a really good job of working together and complementing one another and feeding off of one another. So for somebody if we're looking for somebody that might want to succeed the two of you in doing it, what do you think is important that you might recommend as we're looking for maybe some other people that would be willing to do it?
Thomas and I had a conversation early on after we started to have co-hosts without the other, and we enjoyed them. Paula's been a co-host, and Jeff Hostetler, and Jamie Rye, and Jessica Schrock-Ringenberg was.
Marilyn Rossiter.
And Marilyn. And these are all folks we really enjoy and love, but we did notice that the working relationship, Thomas and I spend a little bit of time together every week and are able to banter well together. So the chemistry really matters in terms of the enjoyability of the conversation. I think overall that a desire to support Ohio Conference and to support the communication.
Really, as we've talked about this, I mean, there's multiple levels. The whole curation side of the podcast that could be divided out. So if there's someone that would have a passion for this that really doesn't want to be in front of a mic or have their voice out there, I mean, there's a fair bit of work to be done behind the scenes. Norm Sohar does a ton of work, and so he's doing the lion's share of that, but also reaching out to people. And Dick and Paula, you could probably empathize with this. How many emails have gone back and forth to get to this point today where we're all on the same Zoom call? This has been about 4 weeks in the making, I think, until we get to this point. So all that process of reaching out to someone, making the initial contact, would you be interested to be on the podcast? Here are some questions we'd like to ask you. Here's a time. Here's how you do it. That whole process, that's what kind of the breaking point for us is. Like, we love the interview part. Like, we love talking to awesome people, hearing from them. Bill and I get to hang out. That's been great. But the whole curation side just kind of got to be too much. So as you think about what happens next, it could be a more people involved than just the talking heads.
Again, so yes, we are looking for some people, some volunteers who'd be willing to work on this podcast. And so you can get in touch with me, Paula Snyder Belousek, at pastor@salemmennonite.com if you're interested in learning more. As you guys have been traveling around, and I know you guys really love Ohio Conference, is from the different people you've been talking to, the different stories you've been collecting over the years, what gives you hope about our conference right now? As you look back over these 3 years and the different missional stories that you've been able to hear and share with others.
What gives me hope is just to think about the amount, and this is not just podcasts, but happens at ACA, at our gatherings, just the amount of people that are committed and find their belonging in Ohio Conference. a lot of the pastors. I mean, this seems like there's a lot of pastors that really see Ohio Conference as their home, and it's not just their work or their job, but like when they gather together at ACA, when they gather together at missional conferences, when they gather together at meetings, that's their home, their support network, their place of belonging. And so that's come out over and over again, and with some of the stories, the people that we interview, to be able to kind of look under the hood of that in a lot of different ways, to hear personal stories about the commitment to Ohio Conference. That's been life-giving, because I feel the same way, and it always feels good to meet and talk with people that have that same sense of belonging to the conference.
Yeah, and I think this is beyond the podcast too. Part of my hope comes from the sense of play that is increased, at least among the pastors and some of the lay folks who are more able to be present, I guess. I think there's been an increased sense of willingness to play with each other, to have fun, to get together, little jokes, little encouragements, it's better. It just lightens the time together so that we can talk about hard things even.
So what was the furthest you've had to drive to interview some of the people for your podcasts?
Kansas City?
Kansas City, yeah. Yeah, I drove to Kansas City. Yep.
But that was for convention. Probably the longest we've driven for only a podcast was probably your old church, Dick.
At Oak Grove when you came?
No, we went to Tedrow.
Tedrow's further?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Okay. So probably Tedrow from Wayne County was about 2.5-ish hours. And those trips were early on, so those kind of stopped fairly soon. We made a couple of those trips kind of right when the podcast was starting. We tried to make it to like a whole series of cluster meetings. After the first couple of months, we said, okay, we can't keep doing that. So that kind of stopped early on. In the last 2 years or so, we really haven't traveled much.
Well, and so we're learning from this coronavirus pandemic that we're in that there's a lot more things that we can do technology-wise. And so it's most likely quite possible that even if some people were interested in doing it, that they might not even have to travel at all, that this is something that could be done from a distance. Is that a possibility?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the right equipment. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're doing today. The four of us are in 3 different locations.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different devices to make it all happen.
Yeah.
So, the one thing I was thinking of, we get involved in these activities in our churches or in conference, and it seems like all of them have a life cycle. And so what would you say is the biggest reason for Ohio Conference trying to keep the podcast going?
I feel like the podcast has been a part of the synergy that's happened in the last couple of years. So not the cause of it, but I think it has partnered with it in a way that's benefited both the podcast itself has grown in that way, but also it's like there's just a lot of good stories happening now. So I think it's been a part of all the good things that are happening in the last couple of years. Certainly the podcast can't take credit for any of those things, but I think it's become a vital communication platform, so where people can hear, and I think it is reaching an audience that doesn't or wouldn't read some of the emails and hard copy things that are put out there.
Yeah, I don't think Thomas and I, either one, would ever say, just to keep it going because it's been going. I think it could be important if it is able to continue to be an important communication piece. And especially if it has some sort of anchor into leadership team, so that there's context and grounding, and so that it's not something all by itself, just kind of hanging out there, but it's something that's connected and helpful. And
also, one thing like you guys highlighted, the podcast it is a window into Ohio Conference for people that aren't a part of conference. So people might listen to the podcast that otherwise don't know anything about Ohio Conference. So again, that's not the primary goal of the conference cast. It's for the Ohio Conference people. It has, like you guys highlighted, provided that window into the conference for people that might be curious or know something about Ohio Conference, whatever the motivation is. It's been that as well.
So as you guys as we wrap up this podcast and think about, this is going to be the final time as our host, is there any sort of challenge or charge that you want to leave to your listening audience in Ohio Conference as you either think about the mission of the church or this time that we're living in? So, a lot of high school graduations are getting canceled right now, so this is your moment to give your big charge.
What, our graduation speech?
Yeah. This doesn't answer your question, but we would put it out there. Bill and I both do enjoy the podcast. It's just we don't have the time. And so whatever happens next, we're still very willing to be involved, to interview people, whatever it is. We're just going to have a much clearer boundaries. So part of me kind of hopes this isn't the last podcast I ever do, but I also know I can't have my cake and eat it too. So if someone else does take it and run with it, we're happy to let them own it, but we'd be happy to grease the wheels however we can. But yeah, I guess my encouragement would be just for people to try something new. I mean, if you love listening to podcasts and it's been beneficial for you, try it out. You might find that you enjoy making podcasts as much as you do listening to them.
It's all about the fan mail.
Yeah. We average 1 fan mail per year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Well, you look forward to those,
I've been thinking about, and I've been talking about this with Crown Hill, and you probably heard it earlier, is just what does it mean to belong to something? And I think the podcast has helped foster a sense of belonging for people that may have otherwise not felt that before. And I've been honored to be a part of that process. But even now with the whole COVID pandemic, the whole sense of belonging has been, I've just been thinking about that, right? We can't go to church on Sunday morning. But yet I've noticed, at least at Crown Hill, there's this increased sense of belonging that even though we can't gather together, people know where they belong. This is my church, and I'm looking forward to meeting together. When someone from my church calls me and someone from my church writes me a letter, or I can meet on Zoom and see my church people, it shows that sense of belonging that wasn't there before. And so, yeah, I think that's something to think about, in Ohio Conference, what does it mean to belong to this conference? As an individual, as a congregation, where do we find our belonging, and how can we grow that sense of belonging to each other in a broader sense of Christ's body just outside of our church walls? Yeah, so where do we belong?
Thanks, Thomas.
Wow, Thomas has words. This issue of Conference Cast, Thomas has words.
Got him.
Well,
well said.
On behalf of Conference, I would just want to thank the two of you just for your passion for Conference and your desire to serve Conference, and for all the work and time that you have put in over the last several years, because I think it has meant a lot for Conference. And as you pointed out, it might not have been the most instrumental part about it, but it certainly was the part that has helped us these last several years with our Gathered and Sent initiative and focusing on all the good things that are going on in Conference. I think that has been, at least for me, has been the highlight of what it has meant, that it has brought out all the good things and all the good people and all the good work that's been done in Conference. And most of all, it brings glory and honor to God. So I just wanted to thank you for the work that you've done the last several years. And hopefully there's some people waiting to pick up the mantle and go with it. And,
right.
We'll pray for that.
Yeah, thanks. And we're really grateful for those who have listened and for really unending expressions of encouragement and support, both from leadership and from our listeners who have reached out. We do joke about that, but we do know there's more than 12, and we're grateful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we get ready to sign off here for the podcast, this is, for the podcast listeners, we're going to bring Kevin back, and he's going to do a liturgical dance to end us out here.
Yes.
So
you did not ask me about this first.
So he's dancing. He's dancing right now. It's so beautiful. It's just so beautiful.
Okay.
No, I want to see it. I want to see it at our next ACA.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, thanks again, you guys. We really do appreciate your work. And those of you who are listening, if you've been sparked or inspired by anything, please do get in touch with myself or with Dick. And we would love to have a conversation with you about how we can continue the Ohio Conference cast. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Signing off.
Ohio people with Mennonite views, and they're gonna give us some missional news. Ohio Conference Cast.
Thank you for listening to another edition of Ohio Conference Cast. We would love to hear from you. Our email is ohioconferencecast@gmail.com. Ohio Conference Cast is brought to you by the Ohio Conference Leadership Team, along with Norm Sohar, sound engineer, Megan Sohar, voiceover, Ann Lehman, publisher, and our many guests and listeners.